This video demonstrates knitting and shaping the front of the tiny cardigan. Remember, this video aims only to demonstrate the shaping and fashioning of the front piece. It is not a substitute for the written instructions that you must follow, as your pieces must be knit to spec in accordance with your yarn, tension dial settings, and the resulting gauge. It's also important to remember that this piece must be duplicated as a mirrored copy, meaning you are making a specific left and a specific right. Because we're knitting this in half fisherman's rib, there is a difference between the face side and the reverse side of the knit structure. To ensure that you knit a left and a right, keep track of which side of the needle bed you designate as the armhole side and which side you designate as the neckline side, so that when you knit the second piece, you reverse those two sides to make a mirrored copy. The written instructions will be worded in such a way that instead of saying decrease 2 stitches on the left, it will say decrease 2 stitches on the neckline side. So it's important to make sure that you designate the neckline versus the armhole side and somehow keep copy or keep a note of that so that when you knit the second piece, you're able to reverse it effectively. Begin by casting on in waste yarn. Knit the waste yarn at main tension for 10 to 15 rows, or about 1 inch of knitting. Again, it's not important that we work a tubular cast on. The waste yarn is a temporary stitch holder. Knit in the draw thread, still working in main tension, setting the carriage to slip in opposing directions to work 1 tubular or circular course, which is 2 passes of the carriage. Drop one side of the bed one position so that you can pass the draw cord bobbin through the opening. Close the beds and pick up the main yarn. Thread the carriage and set the carriages to knit plain at tension 0, 0. Knit the zigzag row, increase the tension to 1, 1, and set the carriages to knit tubular. Increase the tension to 2, 2, and set both carriages to knit plain. Reset the row counter to 0, 0, 0, and knit the first row. After this row, begin grading the tension 1 whole number each subsequent row until you reach main tension. Continue knitting in 1 by 1 until you've completed the rib welt. Once you've completed the ribbing, Set the carriage to knit half fisherman's rib by setting the ribber carriage to tuck in one direction. As you start knitting in half fisherman's rib, you'll see tucked floats collect on every other pass of the carriage on the riverbed needles. Hang 7 wires to put weight on the edges, ensuring that the end stitches knit properly, and move these 7 wires up regularly every 20-25 rows. Everybody's machine is a little bit different, so you may need to move them more or less frequently. Continue knitting in half fisherman's rib until you reach the beginning of the armhole shaping. To begin shaping the armhole, move the required number of stitches from the ribber bed to the main bed and bind these stitches off using the latch tool. Hang the last loop formed from the bind off onto the new edge needle and work, and pull this needle to hold position. This will ensure that that edge stitch doesn't jump out of the hook when you peel that bound off segment off of the gate pegs. Following your written instructions, begin shaping the armhole. At this point, it's good practice to write down on your written instructions which side of the work you've designated as the armhole so that you can work the armhole shaping on the opposing side of the mirrored copy you'll knit next. Following your written instructions, begin shaping the neckline side of the work. As you complete the neckline shaping, there will be a point in your written instructions where you're asked to hang a stitch marker. This will help to mark the shoulder line of the front sweater piece. The shoulder seam is offset towards the back because we're working a French or European style shoulder slope. It's helpful to mark the shoulder line on the front piece so that we have a frame of reference when joining the sleeve into the armhole. This stitch marker will match up with the center line of the sleeve at the sleeve cap. Hang a clothespin on the end of the stitch marker just to keep it out of the way. Continue knitting until the written instructions tell you to bind off. Work the same latch tool bind off that we've been using for the rest of the pieces. Begin by transferring all of the ribber bed stitches onto the directly opposing needle, which is empty, on the main bed. It was very early in the morning when I was recording this video, and I dropped 2 stitches when working this bind off. I left these errors in just as a visual aid for how to triage your knitting when something does go wrong, and it will. Secure the loop that you've been binding off with. Because you're working a chain stitch, you don't want it to unravel and then create more drop stitches to pick up. And depending on whether you've dropped a stitch that was formed on the main bed or a stitch that was formed on the river bed, will determine how you have to knit those stitches back. So here I'm manually knitting stitches or manually knitting back those floats as they appear once the stitch ran. Once the stitch has been sorted out, I'll pick that loop back up and continue binding off. In a couple more stitches, I'll drop another one. This time it was a stitch that was formed on the river bed, which has tucked floats in it, which makes it not more difficult per se, but a little bit more specific in how you latch these up. When tuck stitches are formed and they need to be relatched, you've got to pick up every alternate or every other ladder with the latch tool to maintain that knit structure of that tucked rib that's happening.